Now what we have to do is bring in all of the textures that we exported and put them in the right place. So first we want our background because we want to see how things work. And a good process is to first make a layer. And if we know what it's going to be, which is floor texture, put it in there. And this is one of those where it's good to put the overlay so that we remember when we animate. So we're going to go File, Place, and then we're going to go to Floor. Now we have to where it goes, approximately, or where we like it. If we think there's a better place now, we can always change our mind. So somewhere there. And then in Properties, won't be needing this for now. In Properties, inside Opacity, remember to click Opacity, we can go and put it in Overlay. So as you can see, we are not going to have the Vivid option. So we probably will use Overlay, which is a similar blending mode. Now you're going to see me repeat this process endlessly. And one good thing to think is that we want to think if things are going to be animated or not. So for example, in the case of these lamps, they're going to be still. So we can bring in the texture. Remember to make a new layer, name it, crossing texture. So it's really important that we think what textures we're going to be animating and what textures we are not. And in this case, because these lamps are quite still, I mean quite and completely still, we can just place it in a new layer text that we built and put them in the right place. I got the wrong texture. I'm getting the one for the crossing. There it is. And unfortunately, the vivid light is not one of the ones that Illustrator allows. So we are just going to make it in Overlay, which is similar enough. In this case, this texture, we can bring it down into the crossing lights. The reason why we can bring this into the crossing lights is that we're not going to be animating the texture or the poles because, you know, street lights are quite still. And if you ever have all these objects, all these parts that make this object, if you ever don't know if something is in front of something or if something is behind something, especially when you do the right click arrange and then you can bring to forward. If sometimes you've lost track of where anything is, in this little arrow, you can see the order of things. You can also block or unsee them. As I told you before, I do not recommend that you block and unsee things because then you forget that they're there. But if you're ever struggling and going like arrange backwards, and you don't know where things are, you can find out here and you'll know. Like you can go endlessly and see all the groups that you build. But in this case, we want it as one, and there it is. Now you're going to see me repeat this endlessly. And because we know that we're animating things and we already divided things into the way that we're going to be animating this, we know that the texture of the awning goes somewhere here, right? Above the sewing fill, the awning fill. I guess that typo tricked me. We know that it goes somewhere here, so let's put it here. And the same thing with the art house. We also know that something's happening here, and that is that we want our windows to be above. We already put the texture, so we're going to block it so we can access these things. And then with our windows, in a new layer, we're going to copy and paste them. And then we're going to make the doors. And then our sign. And we know that our wall number 1 has to go underneath. And also wall number 2 underneath these things. The last thing that we have to do is the pencils. And what we're going to do is start from the back to the front. And because these are going to be animated, they're going to go up and down. But we're not going to explode the layers, and that's a little bit of a complicated thing that we're going to discuss later. But basically, what that means is we are not going to change the shape of this object. This object is only going to be going up and down. So we can have texture here. The reason why we can't have texture here or here is that we will be moving this points that we've made. This is going to go fat and then go thin. And that fat and thin means that the general shape of this is going to change. So then we need our texture on a different layer. In your illustration, think about that. Think about the things where you will need the shape to change, and the things where something is just going to be moving up and down or forward and backwards, or is going to disappear and appear. Those kind of properties are easily animated, or if something is rotating, that is easy to animate and doesn't require exploding layers. Exploding layers means that you have access to the points like we did in Illustrator, like to those points. When you explode layers in After Effects, we'll do it later, you suddenly also have access to this. So because we don't need that, we can import our texture. If by some reason you realize that your texture is going over your layer and you don't like that, you know what we can do. And that's use our technique. For now, we can just go into our groups and copy that layer, remove the stroke so we have a fill, and then in the layer of the texture, paste it and delete the fill. Then we can go ahead and bring it down, make sure that it's on top of everything, and there we would have our pencil. However, because this pencil is only going to go up and down, we can keep the texture in here. However, our texture was working well enough without needing the stroke. So what we are going to do is just paste it so that we can work quicker. but you know, if in your case your texture is different, you know how to do it well. Also, feel free to make things slightly smaller if you like doing that. And now I'm just going to copy and paste the texture. Let's take this out to see if we're lucky enough that our texture is quite long. And yeah, we don't have to make it any longer because I don't think we'll reach there. So now we have our illustration ready to export and to share. I want to show you the full illustration so that you see what I want you to actually do, which is finish your business with all the objects that you're doing fully rendered. So this is my full assignment. And this is what I'm expecting you to do for your homework, which is a full illustration. As you can see, I added way more shadows and way more textures. And I went really into objects and went inside those groups and made sure that things were looking extra detailed and extra nice. This does mean that I have many layers, as you can see. Similar structure to the one that I've showed you. And as you might have noticed, the elements of my illustration are kind of living outside of my illustration. In order to work with this in After Effects, your artboard, which is this thing here, will have to include everything. If you cut this, for example, this ruler, and then we want to animate it and bring it in, we will have missed all of this information. So if you do something like that, where things are out, when you export your illustration as a finished illustration, keep your artboard with these dimensions, and when you save this illustration for using it in After Effects, make sure to go to your artboard, double click on it, and change it to 1920 by 1920 or 180 by 180, however you work. Now let's see what you come up with.
Well, now that we've finished our texturing, we have a fully done illustration. So our first assignment is done here. Now we're going to move on to dividing everything in layers and just making sure that everything that we're going to animate is ready.